This is ThinkEnergy, the podcast that helps you better understand the fast-changing world of energy through conversations with game changers, industry leaders, and influencers. So join me, Dan Sege, and my co-host Rebecca Schwartz as we explore both traditional and unconventional facets of the energy industry. Hey everyone, welcome back. We've talked a lot on the show about Canada's goal to be net zero by 2050. But I've been asking myself lately if achieving net zero is really a grassroots movement. I mean, there's a lot of action that needs to happen at the local level before Canada can achieve its goals. And since 50% of greenhouse gas emissions in Canada are from municipalities, before we can talk about the big national picture, we need to look at every community across our country and how they can affect change at their level. And what kind of coordination and effort will it take?
That's right. Without a coordinated approach, communities with all of their different socioeconomic realities, different landscapes, and different local perspectives may implement different measures that may not be compatible with their neighboring communities, or they may fall short of achieving the necessary results.
Did you know that Hydro Ottawa is going net zero by 2030, and the City of Ottawa has committed to achieving net zero of its operations by 2040? Both of these are great examples of grassroots initiatives. So here's today's big question. How important is it to empower community champions and influence decision makers to continue to create the conditions necessary for communities to contribute to Canada's net zero targets?
On today's show, our special guest is Tonja Leach, Executive Director at Quest Canada. They're a nonprofit that supports communities in their quest to reach net zero. Tonja is a sought-after advisor working with Canada's energy sector, the levels of government, and community builders. And she helps them essentially to transition to a more sustainable energy future. Tonja is also active on a number of committees, like the Energy Futures Lab Partners Council and Steering Committee, the Clean Resource Initiative Network, and the Positive Energy Advisory Council, among others. And we're really happy she's here to talk to us today. Hey, Tonja, welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
As the executive director, maybe you could start by sharing with our listeners what the Quest organization is all about, such as maybe talk about your vision, your mission for Canada.
We're in the middle of updating our vision, so I'll give you the old version, and I recognize that it'll change slightly soon. So our vision is that Canada is a nation of smart energy communities, and I say that's going to be updated just because we've done some updating, kind of tying things more closely to the net zero agenda. So there'll be some language changes to that, but the concept and the principle still is accurate and remains the same. So Quest is a national nonprofit organization, and we support communities in Canada on their pathway to net zero. Since we've been doing this since about 2007, and we facilitate connections, empower community champions, and influence decision makers to implement efficient and integrated energy systems that best meet the community needs and maximize local opportunities. So we develop tools and resources, convene stakeholders, rights holders, and advise decision makers, all with a goal of encouraging and enabling communities to contribute to Canada's net zero goals.
Okay, cool. What critical role do communities have in achieving net zero? How important is strong support and buy-in from these communities?
Well, as I indicated, we work very closely with them, so maybe I have a biased opinion on this. But I mean, if you just look at the numbers, communities are responsible for 50% of our energy use and about 50% of our emissions. So that in and of itself tells you how important they are in achieving the net zero objectives that we're striving to achieve. So Canada is going to have to rely quite heavily on communities to get there, but they require support and resources, and they're not being supported or resourced in a way yet that they need to be really be able to play the impactful role that they can and should be playing. many municipalities have been putting together community energy plans, community energy and emissions plans, declaring climate emergency. I think there's over 500 communities in Canada that have now done that. And all the plans that go along with that, while quite aspirational, and I think that's a good thing, has really put municipalities in the driver's seat on energy. And that really has kind of flipped energy planning around a little bit, right? We know energy planning traditionally has been top down at the provincial level, but because they are playing such an active role in kind of dictating what their energy future looks like, it's actually put them in the driver's seat. So this is an interesting conundrum that we're facing right now, and it has led to a number of misalignments, disconnects between what the province thinks about how energy is going to look in 2050 compared to what local governments think it's going to look like in 2050. I think there's a number of stakeholders that are kind of being caught in the crosshairs of that at this point in time, and we need to be building better alignment across them. So they have a very critical role to play, coming back to your question, but there's still a lot of uncertainties about how we actually leverage the role that communities have to play and how we enable them to do that.
I'm curious, what are the low-hanging fruits municipalities can take advantage of?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting one. I think one of the things that part of the uncertainty comes from the fact of not knowing who has what role or responsibility to play and when to play that card. But municipalities, just by their very nature, have a number of cards in their hand to play. They're responsible for land use planning, and we know that one of the biggest impacts on our energy use is land use, right? How are we moving around in our communities? How effectively and efficiently can we do that? Creating communities where you can live, work, and play makes a big difference on the amount of energy that we need. And also, making sure that we're kind of balancing supply and demand. And if you think about that from a thermal context, where is waste heat being generated from, say, an industrial process that could actually be leveraged in the system itself? And if you build communities in a way and plan communities in a way that you can take advantage of those, you're obviously that much further ahead. They also have responsibility on transportation, whether that is public transportation systems, and we see lots of kind of hybrid systems coming in now as well. I mentioned low carbon thermal, enabling net zero buildings and net zero infrastructure development, and supporting renewable energy deployment, distributed energy resources. There's lots of opportunity there, although lots of challenges in that regard as well. So so there's lots of low hanging fruit that they can take advantage of at this point in time and kind of start to contribute to the outcomes that we're all collectively striving for.
Okay, now what makes Quest's approach to supporting community net zero objectives unique?
Yeah, thanks. I think what makes us unique is, a number of factors, actually. At the highest level, I'd say that we take a systems approach to kind of the energy transition, more broadly speaking, not to kind of belittle the need for a sectoral approach, but we need both. And if we don't, my analogy here is you can't rehabilitate a forest if you only focus on the trees. You need to be looking at the entire ecosystem. So that's the approach that we take, is kind of looking at it from an ecosystem. And how do you kind of maximize the efficiency of the entire system or rehabilitate the entire system? So that's kind of at the highest level our focus. We're also unique in that we're across Canada. So we can actually see what's going on in different jurisdictions and kind of share best practices and lessons learned between jurisdictions, which is also really helpful. And we're also focused on what I call the less sexy stuff. So it's, for us, we're not necessarily talking about specific technologies. We are, there's a recognition, I think it was the International Energy Agency, that says we have 80% of the technological solutions we need to get to 2050. But the challenge is really in getting them deployed, and that's where we focus. So this is on, governance structures, business models, regulatory structures, legislation, policy, all of those. There's no ribbon cutting ceremonies for any of those things, right? But those are the things that I think are increasingly being recognized as the inhibitors of, or the pressure relief valve that we need to address. And if we're going to not just achieve net zero, but be sustainable at net zero.
And a quick follow-up for you, Tonja. You recently published a 2021 impact report. What are some of the highlights from this report that you're most proud of?
I'm not sure if it's actually called out in the impact report, but I will say that I'm most proud of my team. I think that the team here at Quest is, we're often told that we punch well above our weight, and I do believe that that's true. And they're just an incredible group of people to work with. So just want to call that out first and foremost. In the 2021 impact report, that was also the first year that we saw the kind of major first successes from a project that we have going on in New Brunswick called the Smart Energy Community Accelerator. And coming back to my first comment I made here about our vision, that's in its next iteration could be reframed as the Net Zero Community Accelerator. It really is focused on building that local capacity, and the results of that project were greater than we had anticipated that they would be. So there's a lot of positive momentum there. Kind of we are taking that as, where do we go next with that? How do we expand that to be a national program that supports both building the local capacity that's needed, so the tools, the resources, the knowledge, et cetera, but also kind of adding another stream to that, which is focused on getting projects to the point of implementation. So project initiation, we'll call it. So really proud of the work that we've been doing there with communities directly. The other piece that I think I'm really want to call out as well is the Innovation Sandbox project that we've had on the go and was referenced in that report as well. And this is really addressing that issue, again, around the regulatory structure. The regulatory structure that we have is not really designed for innovation. So how do you kind of build innovation into that? And the Innovation Sandbox work that we've been doing, which is a concept, the Innovation Sandbox concept, was actually first started in the financial sector and has been in other jurisdictions around the world brought into the energy space. And so we're doing that here in Canada. I'm really proud of that work as well.
Now, with over 5,000 plus communities with different political infrastructures, local concerns, and socioeconomic composition, Tonja, how can local perspective be captured and aligned?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges we're actually facing today. I think there's many people know kind of what they, as their own organization, can possibly contribute. But the alignment of all of these things is really the nugget that we need to crack. So I hate to say that we need deeper engagement, because we hear that so often, right? And we're beyond just wanting to talk about things. We want to be doing things. But we do need to be engaging much more deeply and across multiple sectors more effectively, because we need clarity on costs, on trade-offs, on who's taking on what role, who has what responsibility, what the timelines are. All of these things are unknowns, and I think people are making assumptions about them at this point in time, and that's leading to the misalignment. So in order to get to the alignment, we have to be much more engaged with each other and working much more collaboratively. It was a great comment that I heard the other day, which was, we must stop the energy solution hunger games, right? This is not about anybody, taking over somebody else's space, as it were. This is an and scenario, right? We need all hands on deck if we're going to get there, and we have to work collaboratively to get there, and we have to be understanding and respectful of who's got what role and responsibility in the transition.
So we hear you're helping municipalities reach reduction targets by enabling investments of local renewable energy projects and infrastructure. Wondering if you could just unpack this for me a little bit and maybe give us some examples?
Yeah, so I would say that we enable investment by helping to streamline processes. So I'll give you an example of that. This is a few years ago now, but there was an energy utility in Alberta that was looking to or wanting to kind of build out solar. And they spent, 2 years of their time in regulatory hearings, trying to figure out the regulatory construct for this. And then it came time to they kind of made it through all of that process. And it was time to actually kind of engage with the community to deploy their vision for the solar system. And because they hadn't engaged the community at the front end of this, the community was not very happy about where they had sited on their riverbed this solar system. So that really stalled the process. So a lot of what our role and kind of my comment about streamlining the process itself is kind of making sure you've got all of the right stakeholders engaged at the right part of the process, and so that you don't run into these hiccups at the back end that is just going to slow you down or stall the process. So it seems a bit backwards that you want to take the time at the front end, but by taking the time at the front end, you actually kind of relieve the issue that you may run into at the back end. So a lot of our work is really about kind of playing that coordinator and streamlining the process.
Great example. Now, from what I'm hearing, there's an incredible amount of momentum around net zero pledges in the public sector, from governments around the world and from private sector as well. What are your thoughts around these net zero commitments from organizations? How do they differentiate spin from substance?
Well, I guess on the one hand, I would say that it's great that we're seeing the environment, climate change, climate action sticking through what I would say is a number of serious challenges. COVID, Black Lives Matter, Indigenous reconciliation, what's going on in Ukraine right now. The fact that this is still kind of remaining on the radar, I think is a really positive sign, because I think it's been derailed many times over the past 30 plus years. So I think that's I don't know, very positive sign from my perspective on the momentum that we've got. We must maintain that momentum. Many pledges are ambitious, with a lot of this is what we're going to do, but we don't know how we're going to do it yet. And I think actually in a previous podcast of yours, Bryce Conrad mentioned his moonshot. And I think that this is good too, right? I think this is really important, that we're putting a stake in the ground and saying, this is what we are going to achieve. Understanding we don't yet know how, but we're smart people. We'll figure it out. I think those are essentially what Bryce said. And this is good, but I think what takes it from spin to substance is action. And we also need to start to kind of define the how of what, how we're going to achieve that moonshot. But we also need to accept that it's not going to be perfect, and that's okay. We're going to make mistakes. We need to learn from those mistakes. We need to move on from those mistakes. We need to share the lessons that we've learned so that other people don't follow in our footsteps, and we kind of help everybody leapfrog down the road, as it were. But yeah, we have to start to take action to take it from spin to substance.
All right, Tonja, in your report, All Net Zero Pathways Begin with a Local Step, you speak of how we need to account for behavioral changes and social acceptability to scale up net zero solutions. What do you mean by that exactly?
Yeah, what I mean is that we don't get to net zero without people. So we talk about net zero in terms of, a federal objective, and we talk about it in terms of, introducing electric vehicles into our grid and net zero buildings. But actually, to maintain the momentum that we were talking about earlier, we need buy-in from people. So people play a huge role. We also need people to want to live in the world that we're trying to create. So bringing people along in that process is so critically important. They need to be have understanding of the trade-offs that will, no matter what we do, come out of this, right? There's likely trade-offs on cost. There's possibly trade-offs on reliability. But we can accept those for the environmental benefit that we're going to, achieve. But if we're not clear about what those trade-offs are, and people aren't accepting of them, then it becomes much more difficult to accomplish the outcome of net zero that we're trying to achieve. I think that people are instrumental in insisting on equity and Indigenous reconciliation as part of this transition. So this is not just about transitioning our energy systems. We have to deal with these social issues as part of that. And that actually is an opportunity, and we should be leveraging that as an opportunity. And we need to see, at the most basic level, people need to be willing to walk or ride a bike or take public transit in order to reduce the emissions that each of us contribute to our society and globally. So people have a big role to play. And if we are, forging down this path without engaging them and building the buy-in along the way, eventually we're going to fall off our stool. So we need them. We need people involved.
What do you think are the most promising and impressive carbon reduction and removal technologies from the perspective of maximizing the ability to achieve net zero by 2050?
Yeah, so I actually did, you gave me this question in advance, and I thank you for doing that. So I did a little bit of research because I do sit on the Clean Resource Innovation Network steering committee. And they've been, using some federal government funding to support some really interesting technological projects. And one of the things that is often called out as, one of the bigger challenges we face is methane. And, methane is obviously a huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And so it's one of those things that, if we don't find a solution to that, then we're, it's a harder process that we're trying to get through to get to net zero. So there's a company called Econ Power that has pioneered a technology called pulsed methane pyrolysis. Don't ask me about the details of how it works, but it converts methane into hydrogen and solid carbon, and it virtually eliminates CO2 emissions from the process. So I think it's those, I'm just using that as an example. I think it's like those type of technologies that kind of can enable us to use and maximize the infrastructure that we've already developed, but helps to decarbonize those systems because there's industries that are really challenging to decarbonize, right? And so we often reference like steel and cement and agriculture, and so if we need to be able to provide solutions that decarbonize those sectors as well. So I'll point to kind of those that decarbonize methane as a useful technology that I think is maybe just on the early days of really being scalable and successful.
Cool. Okay. What are you most excited about when it comes to the vision and opportunities of net zero?
To be honest, I think it's about collaboration and what will come from that. I mean, as a society, I think we've all been pretty good about collaborating so far, but and there's more of that happening. But I think that for me is the exciting part. I think this is where really great ideas are born out of good collaboration. I'm really excited about much deeper energy system integration than we've seen so far. And there's many ways that can happen through low carbon thermal solutions, distributed energy resources, et cetera. So anyway, yeah, I'm really excited about the collaboration component of this and how we, collectively bring ourselves together to achieve a mutually beneficial outcome.
Okay, so how can different levels of government develop synergies across sectors to create opportunities that will enable innovation?
I'm going to come back to a comment I said earlier about the energy solution Hunger Games. That just needs to stop, right? It's we've been pointing fingers for so long and saying my solution is better than your solution. So for me, it's really about shifting from I would say an overemphasis. I think on kind of sectoral solutions versus looking at things from a systematic perspective. So I think that is a big piece. And then because nothing actually works in isolation of other things, right? So it's how do we take that more systematic approach to it? So it's a recognition that this is an and conversation, not an or conversation. I think that is one of the so I don't know if I'm directly answering your question, Rebecca, but I feel like this is kind of the nugget that we have to solve.
This one, our listeners always enjoy. What are some of the biggest barriers and challenges you've identified in your roadmap to zero emissions?
As I said before, I think that it's not technology. I think it's not technology in that it's new technology. It's being able to deploy the technology that we have at scale. And that comes back to, those soft things that I was talking about earlier around policy alignment. How is the policy structure between the province, the energy utilities, energy service providers, regions and municipalities, how is that aligning? How is that mutually reinforcing? Because right now it's not, I would argue. Governance structures more broadly speaking, clarity of roles and responsibilities, we need all the various actors to bring their solutions to the table and coordinate them if we're going to achieve the outcomes that we're looking for. So the biggest challenge is that coordination and really, getting to the clarity that we need on cost, on trade-offs, on roles, responsibilities, and making sure that we then have the governance structures in place that enable those outcomes.
Thanks, Tonja. Now, what do you think is the biggest myth or misunderstanding about net zero?
That's a hard one. I think there's lots of misunderstandings. I'm going to throw out cost. I don't think there's, I would say the industry as a whole doesn't really have a good understanding of what this is going to cost to get us there. And not that I think that we could actually put a real number on it, but we don't know how much it's going to cost. We don't know who's expected to pay. This energy transition is very different than some of the transitions that we've seen before this, because they were always adding a new resource base, I would call it, into the mix, right? This isn't about that. This is about how do we decarbonize the one that we've got. And that is a very different, it's a different challenge. So I think the biggest myth or, misunderstanding is that perhaps that this is simple and that that it's not going to cost us, because it is going to cost us and it's very complicated.
We always end our interviews with some rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready, yes.
Okay, let's go for it. What are you reading right now?
I'm just cracking open Mark Carney's Values. As I said, I'm just cracking it open, but this is what interested me in it. The title is Values, Building a Better World for All. And I'm reading this, sorry. Mark Carney examines the shortcomings and challenges of the market in the past decade, which he argues has led to rampant public distrust and the need for radical change. The book touts tangible solutions for leaders, companies, and countries. So very timely, I would say, with everything that's going on globally right now. And I'm hoping to get some useful insights from that book.
Cool. What would you name your boat if you had one?
I don't have one, but my grandfather had one, and its name was Pippet, and I would have to choose that same name. The name is actually a seabird, and the class of boat was a seabird, so that's the correlation there.
Okay, moving on. Who is someone that you admire?
Oh gosh, I think that's changed for me in the last week and a half. The president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky. How could we not say that I admire, just the way he has conducted himself throughout the last week and a half, stood up for his citizens, kind of rallied the world around them and their challenges. I truly admire what he's doing right now.
Now, what is the closest thing to real magic that you've witnessed?
Okay, this is a funny story. We were driving in a snowstorm at night, maybe a month ago or so, on a dark road. Sounds terrible. And a car went flying by us, and in the cloud of snow that kicked up off the road. And then when it settled back down, the car was gone, and we were on a dead straight road. There was no tail lights. It was just gone. And I have, both my husband and I looked at each other and like, where did it go? Is it in the ditch? Like, it was just gone. And still to this day, it's just gone. No idea where it went. So that's a disappearing act.
What has been the biggest challenge to you personally since a pandemic?
Oh, gosh. Okay. Well, I will start to say that I come from a place of privilege, and that I own my own home. I have my family. We've all been safe through all of this. So I'll start with all of that. But I would say, and I will also say that Quest was a virtual organization before this. So that certainly helped as well. But I would say that the hardest thing is transitions. Transitioning from work to home is literally the length of time it takes me to walk down a hallway. So, being able to shift gears from your work mind to mom mind in that very short period of time. And obviously when my kids were learning virtually at home, there was zero transition there at all, right? You used to kind of like double, kind of playing multiple roles all at once. So I would say that's been the hardest thing, but by no means is that hard compared to what a lot of people have been through.
Now, this next one is pretty cool. We've all been watching a lot of Netflix and TV lately. What's your favorite movie or show right now?
I think I'm playing catch up on this. So we at Quest, we often like to share some of the great stuff that is on Netflix or other streaming channels. But I'm catching up right now on The Witcher, and I'm quite enjoying The Witcher.
And lastly, what is exciting you about your industry right now, Tanya?
Well, I would say that despite the challenges that we face on, figuring out who's got what role and what responsibility, never has it ever been as exciting a time in the energy space as it is now. I mean, it's challenging, but that brings excitement to that, to the mix. So yeah, I would just have to say that like everything, really everything about what's going on right now. But I'm just this collective objective of achieving a sustainable net zero future it's inspiring. And it's really exciting to see how everybody's trying to figure out how we come together to achieve that outcome.
All right, Tonja, this is it. We've reached the end of another episode of the ThinkEnergy podcast. Now, if our listeners want to learn more about you and your organization, how can they connect?
Yeah, great. So you can connect with us through our website, www.questcanada.org. That's probably the fastest and easiest way. You can reach out to Quest at info@questcanada.org. And I would even throw it out there. You can reach out to me directly, tleach at questcanada.org.
Again, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you had a lot of fun.
I certainly did. This was a lot of great questions, and thank you for the opportunity to be here and share my thoughts with you.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the ThinkEnergy podcast. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review wherever you're listening. And to find out more about today's guest or previous episodes, visit thinkenergypodcast.com. I hope you'll join us again next time as we spark even more conversations about the energy of tomorrow.